think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. Can't We Be Friends? The Importance of Marrying Pricing, LPM, and Billing. My name is Chris Endy. I'm a board member and officer at Legal Value Network. And today's webinar is the first in a three-part series exploring the intersection of finance, pricing, LPM, and billing. This series was created between collaboration between ILTA and Legal Value Network. And as a bunch of us on both sides sort of got together, we were talking about what the hot topics were in the industry, and this bubbled up quickly to the top of our list. And as we were exploring just how sophisticated not just legal pricing has got, but also service delivery and LPM and invoicing and the connection, we realized it's more important than ever for firms to have sort of a seamless process for the entire quote to cash cycle. Yet a lot of firms are still struggling. And that struggle leads to invoices that are inaccurate, that don't comply with client guidelines, and maybe most importantly, don't convey value to the client. So a lot of negative repercussions of that. So in this three-part series, we're going to explore that and offer some solutions and ideas for all of you. So today is the first part of the series. It's a webinar. We'll have a second webinar in November. And in between, we're going to have a deeper dive. It'll be a 3-hour workshop that will be a pre-conference session at the LVNx 2022 Conference Experience, and that'll take place on September 21st. So if this is interesting to you, if this resonates with you and you want to dive deeper, highly encourage you to join us for that pre-conference session where you can explore this in a more interactive way with your peers, your colleagues, and experts, and walk away hopefully with some solutions for your firm. All right, with that, let's go into some of the housekeeping. We encourage you to use both the Q&A and the chat box on your Zoom. The event is being recorded. The audience will all be on mute. So again, use the Q&A in the chat box if you want to communicate. And with that, I'll just say today's session's being recorded as well. And if you have any questions or aren't a member of Legal Value Network, highly encourage you to become part of our growing community. And you can go to www.legalvaluenetwork.com and get a lot more details. And finally, before we get going, and incredibly important, a huge thank you to our sponsors for this entire three-part series, a big hand, Intap, and Fulcrum GT. Not only did these organizations jump at the opportunity to be part of this particular three-part series with ILTA, but these are companies that have been founding sponsors of Legal Value Network and have been a huge part of making this community what it is today and growing and developing it. So we can't send our thank you enough to all three companies for their continued support. All right, so quickly, here's today's agenda before we get to our panelists. So this is what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. So the first thing we're going to do is have each panelist give you some background about why they're here and why this topic is important to them and why they think it's gathering so much attention in the industry. Two, we're going to dive into the challenges. What are the particular things that are making this so hard? Three, we're going to talk a little bit about solutions, and we're going to focus today on really getting perspectives from our panel about what they've done to start to address some of these challenges and what's worked and what hasn't worked so well. And then finally, we'll leave you before we go with some key considerations and next steps that you can take away. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and dive in, and I want to introduce our panel. And the first thing I want to mention is that unfortunately, Mark McGorry, who's the fourth person there on your screen, will not be able to join us. Mark had an unexpected and unfortunate family emergency that just came up that has required him to travel and be with his family. I've worked with Mark for many years. He asked me to send his regrets. He desperately wanted to be here. This is something that's incredibly important to him. He's been in the legal operations and the pricing operations space for over 20 years. I am going to do my best, having had the good fortune of working with Mark for many years, to play both a moderator role and to provide some of the insights that Mark was going to provide. But wanted to let you know he does send his deepest regrets. Okay, so with that, I want to kick off and give each of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about why this topic is important to them. And while I do that, I'm going to actually stop the Zoom screen. We talked as a group, and we thought it may be better to have you able to see all of our faces when we're chatting, and so we'll bring the presentation back up as we need it. But with that, we'll kick off. And Trevor, it's okay. I'll ask you to sort of start and give us a little background on you and why this is important to you.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Chris. So I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Perkins Coie. I've been here at the firm for a little over 20 years in various roles, 6 years in this role. And I've had experience in a variety of other operational aspects of the firm, data analytics. I did some pricing, did really early LPM in the mid to late 2000s. I actually worked on some marketing pitch creation. I managed the conflicts and intake teams for a time prior to that. And also I did leave the firm for 3 years, and I was executive director of much smaller firms, sort of working obviously with attorneys and legal assistants on legal service delivery processes. So I've really covered the waterfront on a variety of these operational aspects. And why is this important to me in my current role as CFO? My primary focus is maximizing the long-term cash flow returns to our owners, to our partners. That's what I'm evaluated on. So in other words, the overall profitability of the enterprise and maximizing the value to our clients through timely and compliant billing and collections increases our revenue, ensuring our people, process, and technology are aligned across the process, reduces our costs. It also enhances our employee engagement, which improves our productivity and minimizes turnover. So getting this right really does improve profitability at the end of the day. And the other reason I care is I'm ultimately responsible and accountable for the billing and collection functions, which they're part of the broader financial operations team in the finance function. We partner closely with pricing and LPM. Those sit in other areas of the org structure. And we also, of course, work with our attorneys and legal assistants delivering legal services. So at the end of the day, I'm the last stop on the railroad, and we work hard every day to get it as right as we can. So there's definitely plenty of room for improvement, and I'm really looking forward to contributing to the conversation today on how we can do that together.
Great. Thanks so much, Trevor. Linda, let me kick it off to you.
Sorry, I'm muted. You had to say that at least once during. My name is Linda Novosel. I'm the Chief Innovation and Value Officer at Blank Rome. I've been in this role for about 4 years, and this is a topic that is really important to me because for one of the areas that I oversee, which is pricing and matter management, we negotiate a lot of arrangements with clients, and clients want to know that what you've negotiated is what is going to be on the bill. And so there seems to be some disconnect, and not just at my firm, but at other firms as well, and even in my previous roles, between what we negotiate and how we can bill to make sure that we are delivering what we promised, not from a legal perspective, but from an operational perspective. And I think it's embarrassing when those accidents happen. So I feel really strongly that a bill is a form of marketing. It is a form of being able to demonstrate the value that you have delivered throughout the month or throughout the engagement, if it's billed at some other time increment. And making those mistakes is really a reflection on inefficiencies running inside the law firm. So I'm really excited about this conversation. It is something that is near and dear to my heart.
Thanks, Linda. Welcome. All right, Anne-Marie.
Thanks, Chris. So I'm Anne-Marie Farthing. I'm the Director of Billing and Collections for Holland & Knight. I have been with the firm since the end of 2019 in this role. Prior to that, I was at LeClaire Ryan for almost 18 years and started there. In the early days, started as a biller and morphed into many different roles over the years, including e-billing and then into more of the management roles. Ultimately, I ended with the Director of Client Service role that incorporated billing, collections, some intake, and close connections working with pricing and our business development team. So much smaller scale firm, but had the ability to work in various client service areas. So I am here today, much of what Trevor and Linda said, I'm going to echo, but I'm here because client services is a subject that's very near and dear to me. I care about the user experience and how a client views us. And from the billing perspective, our bill is the last form of marketing, like Linda said, that goes out the door. It's our impression to the client, and often the first impression they're seeing outside of the actual exchange of legal work. They're seeing it on paper, and they're seeing what we're presenting to them. So, this is another opportunity to make or break that relationship when the client gets their bill. And I'm hoping that by sharing some ideas and challenges here with the group, that we can shed some light on some of the overarching issues that may not stem just from billing, but can also stem upstream and see the final effects of those pain points.
Great, thanks, Anne-Marie. And I guess I just wanted to add, I know in having discussions with Mark, one of the things that he is so passionate about in his role, building off of all of your comments, was, using this as the way to start to expose just how complicated this is. And I think there's, in some respects, Linda, your point is so well taken. It is embarrassing when a client gets a bill and says, you can't even get the rates right on the bill, or it gets rejected for 16 different reasons in the e-billing system. It is embarrassing. And as Mark has described to me over the course of his career, so often when that percolates back to the firm, the attorney in charge, their initial reaction is, I can't believe we screwed this up. How hard can this be, right? And that's the initial human reaction. How hard can this be? And I think part of what Mark, always says to me is, it's really hard. And one of the jokes we have is the whole, well, it's just a 10% discount. Well, there's about 10 different ways that you can actually administer a 10% discount. And depending on which way you pick, you can trip up e-billing systems, you can have clients asking questions. It's more complicated than people want it to be. And I think part of what he was hoping that this webinar would do is just expose just how complicated it is, and therefore get people to start to think about, it actually takes some real time and effort to solution this right, some real investment of both people and systems and processes to do it right. And the more we can sort of get that word out, the better. So there's my first attempt at channeling Mark. Hopefully I did a reasonable job. All right, well, thank you all. So next, I want to just go back to the PowerPoint just for a second. So as we think about moving into the next section, which is defining challenges, I was thinking about this, and we wanted to sort of think about a visual to get this out there. And trying to put something together, and I often look to my friend Mr. Peanut M&M to help me with this stuff. And we were going through it, and I got this on paper, and the reaction of Peanut M&M was, I can't believe you're doing a webinar on this. Like, how hard could this possibly be? Like, I'm looking at these boxes. You price the work, you do the work, you bill the client, and you get paid. Like, really? Like, we have an hour to talk about this stuff? So with that, I want to sort of turn it back, to the group, and start to delve a little deeper. Where are these challenges? What specifically makes this process so complicated? And what have you seen where maybe people don't fully understand why? And maybe, Anne-Marie, I'll kick it over to you maybe to get things started.
Sure. So I think from my perspective in the billing arena, there are three main challenges that can sum up my world. I think the first is creative pricing, and that sounds like, well, that's a solution. Why is this a challenge? But the challenge comes in that, pricing professionals, you are creative. It's part of your role. You're there to help the client find a solution, and the solution is not going to be one size fits all for every client. And it's great. We're helping them determine what they need and how to satisfy those needs and grow the relationship. But oftentimes I find that engagements have been agreed to before even asking the simple question, can we do this? From a systems perspective, from a team perspective, resource, can we even do what's being asked of us? And sometimes the answer is no. And we find ourselves in situations where we're manually having to accommodate situations because we didn't just have a common meeting to come to an agreement whether this is something that should be offered or could be offered. I think the second challenge is, I call it the relay, the passing of the torch. It's the data gathering and the data transmission to all the pertinent teams. This is, to your point about the 10% discount, there are 20 ways you can slice and dice a 10% discount, and how the client wants to receive that and how we show it on the bills. Whether it's done on the billing side or if it's taken after the fact. We're seeing clients move to a post-engagement, a post refund system where they want the money after usually annually, but there's different scenarios on how to offer that discount. And what may seem really simple to someone engaging in the agreement is, to your point, very complicated as you move into the next steps. And then the last challenge I think that we're seeing right here and now is the expectation and staffing of our billing team. This is no longer just a transactional role. It has become extremely sophisticated in clients' needs, whether it be through e-billing or just the complexity of engagements. So we're asking our billers to do more and more every day and be more integrated in the client engagements and really understand those engagements inside and out. And that's a completely different skill set than bringing someone on, maybe bringing someone on entry level and being able to just put them into these roles. You really need to have that professional growth and understanding of how all these pieces fit together to be able to help manage an engagement.
Great, that's incredibly helpful, and I'll circle back. You raised some really good points, not just about kind of some of the challenges in the processes, but the organizational structure from the team members, which I think is really important as well. But before I do that, Linda, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in and sort of share your thoughts here on the challenges.
Yeah, so I really like the notion of passing the torch, because in my organization, billing is separate from the pricing and the matter management teams, and there's a reason for that. It's because the CFO is in charge of managing the cash flow of the firm, and it works for our firm. But we do want to make sure that what information the pricing people have, the billing people have, and so I see a couple of challenges that I've seen not just at this firm but at other firms. It's a process issue where we are not asking the right questions at intake. Pricing may have pre-approved something, but they didn't pre-approve every single, for instance, we agree on these rates. We usually try to lock someone into sort of promise that they're going to raise rates in let's say the next year, but they haven't necessarily asked that at the intake step. And so we miss critical data when we open up new matters. The second piece is the people. Pricing is busy, billing is busy. Neither of those teams should be responsible for inputting data related to the setup of these matters. And so who does it? You have to have someone who has that role, who is defined as the data steward, if you will, so they ensure that the arrangements that we agree on are getting entered into the system. When you have a breakdown in those, in the people in the process, that's where you have challenges with the billing. And I don't know about your firms, but my firm, the billers are probably the busiest people in the firm. And when the pro formas go out on day one after closing, the assumption is that those pro formas are set up correctly. And when they're not set up correctly, it creates really broken billing processes where there's back and forth between pricing, and then we have to get someone to fix the setups in the system. And so it is to Trevor's point, the time to cash is impacted because there is a delay in getting the bill out. And all of this on top of the fact that our financial systems have become more complex. When I joined Blank Rome, had to learn 3E, and I had spent years and years knowing Elite Enterprise, and it was a very different system from the other systems that I had used. So those three combinations of the people, the process, the technology, if they're not all working in sync, then I think there's a lot that can go wrong.
That's a great point, Lynn. And I'll just follow up on one of the points you made around sort of the person who's inputting or executing on the arrangements, because this is really where Mark's role has sort of flourished, I think, in the last several years, right? And as we think about it, I think about it from a very simplistic way sometimes of saying, if you think about the pricing team, working on the front end to come up with the appropriate fee arrangement that adds value, that works for the firm, and you have it baked and it's done, And then ideally, in a perfect world, your billing team, Emery, when they go to run pre-bills every month, right? What gets spit out is an accurate depiction of the agreement that you've made with the client. And the missing link is the person who takes that agreement and actually executes on getting it into the system to the extent you can, so that when the biller goes and pulls a pre-bill, it's accurate and reflects the agreement that's been made. And to your point, you can't always do that. There are some manipulations you have to make at times to the bottom of the bill or for volume discounts, but that person also makes sure that there's a communication channel to the billing team to say, I've done everything I can on my front end, but here's what you need to do on the back end. I think that role is critical. And I don't think it's so important what you call it. At Goulston, we call it pricing operations. We want to distinguish that it sits between core pricing and billing. It could sit in your billing team, it could sit in your pricing team, but it is a person with a tremendous skill set around technology that knows whether it's Aderant, Elite, something else. You've got to know that system inside and out. And I can tell you from experience, that's also the person, Anne-Marie, to your point, that will tip you off that you may have a problem. So when you say, we just agreed to this complex 40-year rate deal by a category of timekeeper like this, that's the person who's going to say, okay, I can set this up with a scaled approach over 4 years, but the categories you've agreed to aren't the way we categorize our people, right? So I'm sure you're all familiar. You see these like, we'll charge mid-levels at this and juniors at this and, partners at this and counsel at this. Well, what about senior attorney? Where does that fall? Oh, we didn't talk about that. What about this time? Well, we didn't talk about that. Like, well, you need to go talk about that first. Because instead, what's going to happen is you get to the point where you go spout the first bill umpteen months later, and then you realize like, oh, why is this one person valued at some wacky number? Well, it didn't fit neatly into the structure that you agreed to 4 months ago. Really bad time to go back to the client and say, actually, we have to rethink our agreement because we didn't think through this very carefully. So I just think there's an incredible value there. And I guess I would also add, it's an interesting discussion. And Trevor, I'm interested to get your thoughts. I'll be a little provocative, but Linda, you mentioned that there's this torch passing, and that at least where at your firm, there's the billing team still sits with under the CFO. We actually changed that, right? And I think it's a good question for firms to ask. What works for you? So we now have our pricing team, our LPM team, and our billing team all within one umbrella that is separate from finance, from an organizational structure. We still collaborate, we get along, but the idea is instead of passing the torch, we're all under, the same tiki umbrella or whatever it is, tiki hut, right? And so we all have different roles, but when we get together as a team to talk about goals, when we get together as a team to talk about just what's going on, how we're working together, it's one integrated unit now. You're not passing off between departments. And I think that there's a strong argument to say, why are you so caught up in org structure? It doesn't matter where someone sits, you should all collaborate. Yes, and the but is, I'm a believer that structure does matter, and how you structure your team can impact the ability to work together effectively. So I throw it out there as, for our firm, it actually worked better to have billing actually move to the same group as pricing and legal project management. I don't think that's right for every firm, but I think it's a question worth asking these days, at least. So Trevor, I'll throw it back to you to if you want to throw something back at that.
Oh, you want me to respond to that?
Whatever you'd like. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think it's part of a broader conversation about what problem are you trying to solve, right? And then the second question is, well, who do you have to solve it? And that might be a little different for each firm. And I do think that, yes, organizational structures are an important part of the conversation. If reorging could solve all of our problems, we would have already done it. So I think that as much as the idea that if we put people under the same umbrella, they'll get along better, I think you have to kind of go a little bit deeper and say, what are those handoff challenges? How can we create that shared understanding? And that could involve moving teams either one way or the other. Maybe billing goes out of finance, maybe LPM pricing comes into finance. Different firms will make different decisions. And again, based on the facts that work for them and the people that they have. What are the leadership skills? What are the operational types of knowledge that they have, to your point, Chris, about Mark's skill set? do you have those people? Where do those people reside? How do you put those pieces together? And most importantly, do you have the leaders to lead that integrated team? So I think that, and also firms are going to have different answers based on volume. You know, if you're a $100, $200 million firm, maybe $500 million firm, you have a different opportunity set or different scale than a firm that's at $1 billion, that's a firm that's $2 billion, and so on. And, you know, the largest firms out there, the 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, 5 billion, a lot of them are already operating in fully integrated shared services centers, right? Where everybody is part of shared services, whether you're pricing, LPM, billing, collections, whatever, you're all part of shared services. So if you kind of take it up scale and you say, you know, how should a law firm operate when you're really talking about scale? Yeah, it's all part of shared services. You're not even talking about this department, that department anymore. You're talking much bigger. You know, and if you ask me, I kind of would turn the mirror around, Chris, and say, if I was building from scratch, yeah, I'd build an integrated function within financial operations. But again, that comes from my experience, having worked directly sort of on, we didn't call it LPM, it was 2006, but when I was doing that type of work for an asbestos defense portfolio, I was sitting in finance, and it was super helpful to literally have somebody outside my door, and we're talking about what the teams are doing, how the bills are coming in, how we're preparing the partners to have the conversations with the clients. So whatever that means for different firms, I do think that creating those relationships and that shared understanding of what different people do and how those outcomes are manifested to clients is super important. And if a reorg works for a firm to do that in whichever direction it goes, and you have the personnel that makes it work, yeah, I think it should be on the table.
Well, I think Trevor brings up a good point. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Chris, but I think Trevor brings up a really good point about who do you have on your teams. And I know you shouldn't build a structure around your teams. You build the structure and then you fit the, you fill the roles. But there are some key players that may already be on your teams, at your firm that are strong players in these areas that can bridge the gaps. And so that model may work better for that firm rather than reinventing something that doesn't currently exist. You know, and I know that, unfortunately with Mark not being here, we're not able to go hear his perspective firsthand, but we have implemented a role similar to Mark's, but it is not as fully developed yet, but it's a billing operations role that is sitting in that hub spot that's working backwards with pricing and client development, intake, and forward with billing. And that person knows the systems, the processes, significant billing experience. And for us, that really works. And Trevor also mentioned, you have people that have these skill sets that utilize those skill sets if they have them, because those are going to be the key players, and they're the ones who can see this from the 50,000 level view and help others and educate others to better create the model that works best for your firm.
It does start with the people, and we do have a role that is dedicated to managing the pricing setups, and we created that role, I think, in 2021. Maybe 2021. And the person who's in that role has a very strong technical set, an understanding of the pricing arrangements, and really understands 3A, or the financial system. So if you can find someone with that skill set, it doesn't matter whether they're part of pricing or billing, and at my firm, they happen to be part of pricing. We have had the opportunity to clean up lots of really bad data and make sure we found out that we were double discounting in some situations because of the situation of, we're going to apply a 10% discount. And so somebody put in a 10% rate discount, and then someone else put in a 10% bottom of the bill discount. And so we were able to clean up a lot of that stuff. And it's been a huge value for our attorneys as well as our billing team, because they know that when there is a problem on a pro forma, or when an attorney says, you know what, I want to request to have this particular timekeeper's rate discounted, they can go right to that person, and who is part of pricing can approve that change and then make the change in the system and revalue the time and get the bill out the door as quickly as possible. But if you don't have the right people and then the process in place, the technology is not going to solve the problem on its own. And a lot of partners think that it's just a technology issue. Well, we have this wonderful financial system, and so we should just be able to have everything in the system. Well, that's great, but if the data is bad, then it's not going to work that way. One of the challenges that I didn't mention in my opening, and I have to talk about this because every firm deals with this, are the rogue partners that have and they go off and they just negotiate a rate for themselves and their associate on a massive matter, and the rates get entered into the system, and then all of a sudden there's 30 timekeepers that are working on the engagement, and you see most people are getting charged out at their standard rates, and then you have these weird kind of two people who are getting charged out at lower rates, and then the client comes back and says, why are we paying different rates for all these people? That is something that we've been able to tackle through this people and process. For the most part, there's always going to be rogue partners that go off and do their own thing.
This is incredibly helpful, and I before we move to solutioning, I have to ask, I know we could probably spend hours on this topic, but I'd love to get your perspectives on the impact of outside counsel guidelines, which I know aren't brand new, but still, continue to seem to grow in terms of the number of clients that have them and the complexity of them. And I know that there's a handful of challenges around not just compliance, but intake and review and all of that. I'm just curious, without taking us too far down a rabbit hole, where that ranks on your list of challenges, and if there's any specific nuggets that you think are worth sharing. And happy to kick it open to whoever has a thought on that.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
I was just going to say that it is the probably the biggest challenge, because as every day there's a new set of guidelines, and every time we think we've seen it all, we see a new set of guidelines with some other restriction that we need to get implemented into the system. And in fact, this afternoon we have an operations call to discuss to make sure that we have the right process in place to get those restrictions in the system. We have rolled out INTAP time. That is INTAP terms, and it's sort of in the process of kind of getting used to it, training the system. I'm hopeful that as that process matures and as the system matures with the training of the system, that a lot of these things are going to be more easily captured and surfaced on INTAP time. So if it's a time entry issue, there will be a notice to the person who's trying to enter the time that you can't block bill, or you can't enter more than 10 hours a day, or whatever that is. But having these systems that are integrated is really helpful. But it is a challenge, and the outside counsel guidelines are a massive undertaking for sure.
Yeah, I would just echo what Linda says. They grow in complexity and volume every day, it seems, and this is part of the evolution of providing client services. This is the more and more clients are going to continue leaning on guidelines to help them control their legal spend and to help them outline what terms we are agreeing to with them. So I think for us, we actually do a good job of data sharing with our guidelines. We get those into the hands of the people that need them. We carved out a group that is completely dedicated to the compliance side of complying with client guidelines. This was a relatively new group when I started with the firm. We implemented this. It started as a team of one. It's now a team of 3. And we also have solicited some of our practice assistants and paralegals to help in this effort, but we go through and summarize guidelines and try to condense them into executive summaries for our attorneys or any of the working timekeepers. We provide some training sessions. This has been a very popular area. I think we started with 13 clients, and based on the demands and the growth, we had to stop at those 13 and could not take on any additional to help help with the attorneys. But we're at a point now where we're looking at technology to supplement this, and we're piloting a product that we think might be a really good solution, similar to the terms and INTAP has a product, but I similar to that. This is a product that allows you to put in rules, ties back to the guidelines, and it stops not at the point of time entry for us. We cannot do it, but it's right as our time is released from INTAP into Adirant. So we're piloting that just to see how that will go. We've released one client, and so far this is a 2-weekend pilot, and so far the response has been overwhelmingly positive. So I'm hoping this will be the next step. But like you mentioned earlier, Linda, systems and technology are not everything. You have to have the right people in place too to help implement that. So this seems to be hopefully the secret sauce for us to move this forward.
Yeah, just to quickly add, I think this is a really critical discussion point. If you're talking about solving the problems, I kind of look at it as a supply chain. You need to move quality control up the supply chain. You can't have it at the end of the assembly line. And
Exactly.
for us, it really crystallizes in the e-billing area. A lot of e-billing becomes de facto compliance monitoring, to Anne Marie's point. And so trying to think about both process and then also technology and just that information sharing, one of the things that I see is we need to have a common shared understanding of what is the system of record for various pieces of data, whether it's literally financial data. I think we know the system of records, the billing system, but outside council guidelines can live lots of different places. I think INTAP terms wants to be the system of record for that in the future. Right now, people are keeping things in OneNote, they're keeping things in spreadsheets, they're keeping things all over the place, and they're not in a central area. So one of the things that we're really trying to do, to Anne Marie's point, is look at technology. What do we have, and how can we not just look at one solution, but sort of a Swiss cheese approach. One piece of Swiss cheese, you have a lot of holes, you put another one on top, maybe you still have 2 holes, but once you put 3 or 4 pieces of Swiss cheese, there's no more holes. And so looking at what can we do with INTAP, pushing guidelines to time entry. We've gotten into the eBilling Hub API to try to get more real-time data on what's happening in there, and looking at how we can leverage that data back to our systems. We've implemented the BillStream paperless pro forma product that I think will have some capabilities to trap some of this stuff at pro forma time. So I don't think there's one solution, but I think if you take that approach and say, what can go wrong at each stage of the supply chain and what can we do to intersect that, that definitely will get those outcomes that you want on the back end, which is, to Linda's opening point, that invoice that is completely compliant. And from my standpoint also, and then also timely. So yeah, I think it's critical to look at those OCGs. Or the informal agreements as well. Clients just have preferences. Some of our largest clients, they want to see things certain ways. And we spend our legal assistants and attorneys spend a tremendous amount of time reviewing and correcting pro formas and correcting people's bad time entry every month. So even though it's not an outside council guideline, it's a firm standard. And those are the kinds of things that, again, in a future state, we want to have those at point of time entry to teach people, no, you can't enter your time. You didn't do it right, go back and fix it. So that it doesn't, the burden doesn't fall on the folks down the supply chain.
Yeah, I like that analogy to the supply chain because, and getting back to the sort of pricing, at the pricing point, really defining what the arrangement is and documenting it somewhere is really critical. I know in my last 2 jobs, I've taken over positions where the documentation simply wasn't there. It's in the system. There are setups in the system, but they didn't necessarily match what the arrangement was. And so documenting them has been something that my team has been working on for the last 3 years. And populating them into a source, a table in Elite or 3E so that they can be surfaced on the pro forma. We're also in the process of integrating through INTAP Open. I hate to be an advertisement for INTAP, but INTAP Open, we've established a workflow so that depending on how the people who are filling out the form answers questions, it will define what the arrangement is and pre-populate those, what we're calling pricing instructions. So that is really critical because it'll at least give the biller at the end of the supply chain the ability to sort of look at this and say, does this look right? But they can't rely, if they can't rely on the data in the system and have some ability to double check, there's nothing that they can do to ensure that the bills are going out correctly.
That's a great point. And I think we're tipping into the solutioning phase. And before we get too deep, I wanted to just share a couple more thoughts with our audience here to sort of bring this back together. So this is what we started with, and my little friend Peanut M&M has been sort of taking notes, and this is just some, right, of the things that make this hard, right? And I think you know, this was the point that Mark was raising as we were talking about this session, which is people think, some people think it's here, right? Partners often think it's here, and it's really this and probably more complicated. So just starting with an understanding of, well, why is this so hard? Well, here are just a handful of reasons why this is so hard. And you know, we as a group decided to put outside counsel guidelines as sort of its own box overarching, because it touches everything from pricing to performing the work to billing to collections. So it really just hits all the entire cycle, and then all these other things that just sort of float around. And again, we could probably spend 15 minutes with everyone on this Zoom and have about 100 more clouds in the matter of 15 minutes. And then I think to a lot of the points that our panel is making, you know, kind of underlying some of this is just making sure you have the proper resources, communication protocols, and defined processes, which help you start to overcome some of these complications. So, you know, really, this is sort of in a nutshell why this is so hard. So, I guess with that, I want to turn back to the panel and sort of continue down the road we've been going down around the solutioning. And I guess I did want to just mention that we had a couple of questions come in. One of them I thought maybe we could, if anyone wants to address as part of their discussion points, a really good point that, you know, arrangements can change midstream, and sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 times. You know, how do you overcome the challenge around data collection, just making sure that arrangements stay up to date as you're trying to work through all the other work that's coming in? So a great question. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that specifically or just weave it into a broader discussion, but wanted to make sure we address that.
I can address that. You know, we do have a distribution email for any sort of pricing approvals that need to be vetted by the pricing team. And so if an attorney comes to us and says, the client is pushing back on this, can we work on something? We usually will vet that through that pricing approvals. It's actually a workflow. Also, our lawyers know that if the client is, or if they need to change an arrangement, they need to get it approved through the pricing team before we commit to that. And so once that is approved, our pricing team knows that they need to notify the person who changes the system, who is responsible for maintaining clean data in the system. And so it gets implemented. And for the most part, 90% of the time we know about those before billing. There are still billing changes that happen because an attorney sees a bill and they say, oh, well, this is higher than I thought it would be. I need to adjust this person's rate. And, my pricing team's role is to push back on those rate increases. And instead, but to the extent that they can't, that's the process that they have to go through. So having a process is really important.
Yeah, Linda, that's a great point. I was going to say the same thing about process. And I would say just also to be cognizant of the flip side of the question, which is arrangements can change 2 to 3 times. We also have seen a lot of issues around an arrangement for a defined period of time that doesn't get set up correctly, that lingers forever. And so, I've done at various companies I've been at audits of, where do we have special, for example, special exception rate arrangements in the system? And I can't tell you, I've had situations where you go to attorneys and say, hey, I'm just checking in on the exception rate that you put in 2005 that's still sitting there. They're like, what? We've been billing at what rate for how long? Like, no, that expired, 10 years ago. Like, well, we should take it out then, right? I mean, it's a little hidden, tricky part that, when you put an exception rate in, if it's for a defined period of time, you got to remember to actually take it out And often it just goes unnoticed. And to your point, Linda, I think you mentioned before, you're billing at a reduced rate or a discount that no one even intends to do. And it just doesn't get caught. And it's hard to catch. And Anne-Marie, I'm sure you see thousands and thousands of pre-bills going out, busy folks looking at them. It's just not as easy as it sounds to say, well, why didn't someone catch that on the pre-bill? It's pretty hard. Like, people are busy. It doesn't always get caught.
Yeah, and especially if they're using a template that doesn't have standard rate next to the rate that you're charging. That's why I always like the template that has standard rate versus the agreed rate, if you will. We annually have a process where the pricing team spends time with all of the billing attorneys and goes through every single open and active matter where there's an arrangement set up. And so that is the opportunity for us to say, these rates are, 2 years old, and it's time to renegotiate this arrangement. I think those regular revisits are really critical. Otherwise, those things will never be caught, or if they'll be caught when it's too late.
Yeah, and as part of the regular revisits, it's also good. I know we did this at my prior firm, and we're also moving towards this at Holland and Knight, but showing them what the missed opportunity is. We recognize that you can't always take an exception rate and move it to standard. But if you see the value of what you've worked over the past 12 months, 2 years, and you see it in conjunction with what it would have been at standard, it gives you some perspective to say, oh, I've had this rate agreement in place for 3 years, and I should take this into account. My other clients, and you see it against your own clients as well, other clients, so you can see where the opportunity is, and it helps. Those small incremental increases collectively result in a lot of additional revenue.
Yeah, we have a similar process that surfaces these systematically and tries to show the opportunity cost. And I would say the other piece about exception rates that's really important, again, it's this sort of intersection between what are we trying to do, if it's either a partner making a deal or if it's pricing, and what does the system do? We have some suboptimal situations where those exception rates get set up at the timekeeper level rather than an exception group. Now you're chasing a lot more rabbits, right? You're not chasing 10 rabbits, you're chasing 100. And so that's something that we've been working on over the last year. Let's make really sure that we understand all the features and functionality of the rate management module. We are 3E shop as well. It's incredibly complex, but it's worth time and investment. And then how do you educate the pricing team and billing partners about, okay, if you're gonna need to do special exception rates, absolutely can't do a bottom of the bill discount or other things. Here are the ways that we want to do that. Makes it a lot easier to follow up on the back end.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about that role and the person at our firm who manages that process, where they understand the system inside and out, and without that, you're not going to get it set up correctly. Or it'll take a lot, and for someone to really know that system, they have to be dedicated to that process.
So another question that just came in sort of on this topic, a really good one. Who do you feel is ultimately responsible or accountable that the arrangement is correct on the bill? Is it pricing, billing, the partner? Where does the ultimate accountability land?
Where should it lie or where does it lie? Two different questions.
Yeah, I think that ultimately it is, it's a team effort. So diplomatically, I will say it is a team effort. However, as I said before, the billers cannot be expected to know the pricing arrangements if they haven't been told. And they also have volume that, prevents them from being able to review every single invoice. So we need to make sure, meaning the pricing team, needs to make sure, or whoever is responsible for those setups, that the setups reflect the arrangements that are made. And in my firm, it happens to be the pricing team. If that is in the billing structure, then it would be the billing structure. And yes, I think there is some responsibility on the part of the partner who has an arrangement with their client to make sure that they're reviewing the invoices. But we all know that partners get busy, and so they may not be looking at, and nor should they be expected to, especially again if they're relying on that template that just has the rate that we're charging the client as opposed to standard rate versus agreed rate. There's no way that they could remember 800 or 600 people's rates. They just don't know. So they don't know if it's discounted appropriately. But there
And
should
even
be some review on their part.
And even if this didn't come through pricing, this originated with the attorney themselves engaging with the client. You know, oftentimes they're practice assistants or legal assistants, whatever the terminology is at your firm, but they're often the ones filling out the forms. And not to say that they aren't all aware of the engagements, but you know, I know there are times when they are not aware and they're filling out the forms to get the forms to go through because the attorney is saying, I need a matter opened. So, you know, garbage in, garbage out, that's what we're getting in. So I think that I don't know that there's one answer for who owns this responsibility, but I do think the benefit of having a role or a team that ensures that what's coming in is accurate for the billing of the client. For us, it is, we actually have a team carved out. The official title is timekeeper matter maintenance because they own all of those modules in the system, but they sit between intake and billing. They roll up to me, and that's part of their role, is to take those engagements and make sure that we're getting all the accurate information for the billing setups. But I've seen this successfully sit on the intake side as well, but you definitely have to have someone that is going back, they're familiar with billing setups with different types of agreements, and they're going back and actually questioning the attorneys if something is askew on the forms.
Yeah, we have a team that operates just like that. It's the same type of thing. The other thing I'll add is I do agree with Linda as well that it's a team effort, and I think that the communication throughout the firm, and especially the attorneys and legal assistants, we call them LPAs, as to their role in the process and the importance of that, and also the billing team and their importance in the process. It's sort of back to the supply chain thing again. If you're on the conveyor belt and the box that you're trying to deliver to the client, to the customer, has a really expensive watch in it, and you're sitting there and you see the box isn't closed and that watch is going to fall out, and you let it go by because that's someone else's problem, well, that's on you, right? Maybe you're not accountable for making sure at the end of the day that you're delivering the box to the customer. But if you see something, you need to say something. And so, yes, the billers can't know everything. We're running 20,000 performers a month. A very small subset of those are going through pricing, right? So to Anne Marie's point, a lot of this stuff is coming directly from partners and LPAs. But if something doesn't feel right, make sure you're surfacing it. And we should create mechanisms within finance that we can escalate those things and get those to the right people. We don't want those to go all the way to the e-billing system. Well, that's an e-billing. I know that's going to be an e-billing issue. Well, if you know it's going to be an e-billing issue, escalate it before it gets to e-billing, because they've already got 1,000 rabbits to chase. Don't give them another one. So those are the kinds of things, that education across everybody, so that they know what happens before them and what happens after them, and they know to say something if something doesn't feel right.
And surprisingly, there are two questions that I think often do not get asked, that regardless of who is discussing with a potential client or, you know, working the engagement, two questions that completely set the engagement off on the right tone are, is this an e-billed client, and who is paying the bill? And you know, you think those are common questions and or common answers, but they're not. How often do we find, I'm sure there's many people in the out of the participants that have this struggle, where you find out down the line that we've been sending bills to the client and a third party was the payer. Oh, and that third party is e-billed, by the way. So now let's go backwards. And I know that's going to take us down another rabbit hole, so I'll stop there. But we all know the challenges that arise from those issues.
Good point. So we're quickly approaching our last 5 minutes. I want to share a couple of things and takeaways, and then hopefully answer any last questions and give our panel a chance to have one final take. So I just wanted to share one more thing. You know, we talked a lot about process. I think the panel's done an amazing job of sort of describing that. You know, one of the things before you can improve a process, sometimes you have to actually define it. And I just wanted to share this. It's on purpose that you can't read it. But, you know, as part of our, you know, journey to try and tackle some of these issues, we wanted to document the process just from pre-bill generation to getting an invoice out the door. So a small subset of the entire quote to cash cycle we've been talking about. And again, people think it's pretty simple. And this was sort of just the first iteration of a process map that we came up with, just for one small part of the entire process. So again, you know, to the extent that people are questioning, well, how hard could this be? I think going through, you know, the effort to do something like this really helps crystallize with people that it's actually very hard. There's a lot of steps. It's very complicated, and can lead you to a better path. So with that, I want to just share some of our takeaways that our panel put together, and then hopefully we can have time for one last thought. So here are some of the things that hopefully came out of our discussion. So number one, I think, organizational structure does matter. So worth thinking about whether your firm is set up, for success. We've talked a lot about the pricing operations role. I think Linda did a great job describing that, even with Mark not being able to join us. Worth considering. Documenting processes before tackling improvements. You got to understand what you're doing before you can figure out how to improve it. We didn't really get into this one. We talked about it on some of our prep calls, but just capturing return on investment, right? There's so much you can do, but as Anne Marie has mentioned many times, like it's a ton of work, right? So if you're going to make investments in people or investment in other ways, do what you can to capture the ROI so you can keep that flowing. A lot of talk about communication. And then I want to leave with a couple things. One, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Like part of the value of this community and all of us being part of the community is to tap into each other. So I'm not going to put any of our panelists on the spot, but there's a lot of people who've tackled this in different ways. So if you're struggling with it, definitely reach out to people in the community and get some advice instead of trying to start from scratch. And then, of course, if you like this and you want to keep diving deeper, I think that'll be a great time to join the pre-conference session on September 21st, where we're going to do some workshops, do some examples, and really hopefully leave people with some very concrete, specific steps for their particular firm on how to make some improvements. And then it's not on the list, but I have to say it, based on Trevor's comment, and go buy a ton of Swiss cheese because I think you're probably going to need it. So with that, we have 3 minutes left. I want to just go around quickly and see if our panelists have any final takeaways in 1 minute or 30 seconds. So I don't know, Linda, I'm happy to start with you and go around.
Sure. I would just say that, there's a lot of moving parts to this process of making sure that you are billing appropriately and that your pricing arrangements are reflected appropriately on the bill. And it takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It's a marathon, not a sprint, as one of my bosses used to say to me. And I think that's really wise advice.
Emery?
I think my one takeaway is just to, and this builds on something Trevor said, but just remember that we are professional services industry. And at the end of the day, this is about making sure that our clients, whether they're internal or external, are getting the quality that they expect and that we're promising. And I think if you take that view, regardless of your role in the firm, you are an important cog in the entire system, that makes this machine run. So if you take that view and translate it into everything that you do, and like Trevor said, if you see that watch is falling out, it doesn't matter who you are. Be a part of the solution and find those people that that are there that can help you, so that collectively we continue to grow and provide better services both internally and externally.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think the points around systems thinking, law firms, that's what we should be really good at. We aren't necessarily very good at it. We have lots of small teams, and we reflect our practices, right? We have lots of practice groups and sub-practice groups and practice groups within offices, and we self-organize these groups. But systems thinking will help you pull that together and find those comprehensive solutions. The one last thing I think is really important, it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, which is enlist management support. Make sure you're educating, whether you just have a managing partner, whether you have an executive committee, a management committee, enlist their assistance, because partners might not listen to us, but they might listen to their management committee, they might listen to their office managing partner, their practice group, their so on and so forth. So it's important for them to have a shared understanding of why this stuff matters as well.
That's a great point. And I want to say one, thank you to our panelists. This was fantastic. You all put in a lot of time, and I can't thank you enough for sharing your experiences with our community. One last thank you to our great sponsors, Big Hand, INTAP, and Fulcrum GT, and also to ILTA for being a great partner in putting this together. And really looking forward to our remaining 2 sessions in this series, and appreciate everyone joining us today. So have a wonderful rest of the day.
I didn't realize NTAP was a sponsor, so
There
we
you
did
go.
our job. Right.
Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.